Touring is more expensive in 2023 than any other point in time in the music industry. It's crazy. Bands are making nowhere near what they used to, and they're taking on a lot more expenses. Well, recently, Dez Fafara, who from DevilDriver and Coal Chamber, he went on record talking about this. But the reason we're bringing this up, because we've already talked about expenses a ton, he's also a manager.
I am your manager. What's up?
He actually manages a handful of bands too. So I kind of skimmed this article to see what he was talking about, and there are some really interesting points to bring up here. So the headline for our article on Blabbermouth, DevilDriver's Dez Fafara on increased cost of post-pandemic touring. It's insanity what's happening, is the quote that they have him saying. But the article starts out by saying, in a new interview with the Heavy Metal Mayhem radio show, DevilDriver and Coal Chamber frontman Dez Fafara spoke about the realities of post-pandemic touring, including increased travel expenses, gas, tour buses, hotels, and flight costs. Dez said, quote, "The business of it is getting really called into the forefront now because bands are starting to talk more about the business. Before, it was kind of taboo to talk about what you make on tour, what you don't make on tour, if touring is hard monetarily. 5-10 years ago, people didn't talk about how much buses were or how much it was to tour. And now it's coming to the forefront because everything has tripled," end quote. Now that's something that I've talked about on this channel, about things that I talk about. There are labels and bands and other people that have reached out to me that have pretty much said, like, you shouldn't be talking about this shit publicly. And to me, I say, why the fuck not? Because the more people talk about this stuff, the more it's in the forefront, the more people are going to know. Other bands are going to know how this stuff works. Like, in every industry, when people tell you not to talk about how things work, it's because they don't want you to know how things work. I've seen some of my videos that I've done industry talks where smaller bands have responded and been like, thank you for being transparent about this because we learned something from this. And that's the goal of my entire channel at this point. He is right. I'm glad that people are starting to speak out about this stuff because, 5-10 years ago, yeah, people weren't talking publicly about how much stuff costs. Behind the scenes, as tour managers and techs and stuff like that, we'd be talking about expenses, but nobody was talking about it publicly like they are now. Tiger in chat says, it is because most companies that are in the touring part are trying to get their money back that they lost because of the pandemic. That is why bands are finding it hard. I say it will drop in price in a few years. I could be wrong. I'm no expert, just saying. So you are right about one thing. A lot of the pricing and a lot of the expenses being really high are due to the fact that a lot of these companies in the industry are trying to make up for profits that they lost over the last couple of years. Buses are charging more, trucks are charging more. Even stuff like audio, lighting, video, special effects, rental companies, they're all charging more than they used to. Now, where I think you're wrong, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot and say you're wrong, I just want to reiterify this for everybody because a lot of people have asked. People have said, in a couple of years, prices will go down. I do not think they will, to be 100% honest. It has become the new normal. All these companies in the industry know that they can charge this and people are still going to pay it. So why would they lower their prices in the future? If people still have to pay it and still need to tour, fuck it. Look at Live Nation last year. Live Nation made record profits last year. Continuing on in this article, Dez says, quote, "I said to somebody the other day, I don't know a young guy in a van is going to do it. I don't know how you're going to do it," he continued. "And to give you an example, I have a huge management company. I had a band go out on a small little run. They came home with $235,000. That's gross total. They grossed $235,000 on that tour. But with all of the costs and with everything else, the band made $12,000. And that's with merch, everything. 240 grand. The band came home with 12 grand. I mean, it's insanity, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think the buses are ever going to come down. I don't think the crews are ever going to come down. I don't think lighting that's doubled, gas that's tripled, I don't see any of that returning back to form to where people can do this. So it's going to be a real rough go." End of that quote. Now, what we're going to talk about here for a second, which is one of those things I want to dive into that not tons of people are probably aware of. Let's talk about how managers get paid. Because he said the band grossed $235,000 and came home with 12, right? Not a lot of money. Managers for bands in the music industry, traditionally, they do not get paid a salary or a set fee. They make a percentage of what the band grosses coming in. Now, every management situation is different. We need to say that to be fair here because I don't want to make any assumptions about anything that's going on in this situation. And things are changing over time. Bands are starting to realize that, hey, this is pretty bullshit that our manager is making way more money than we are. So percentages have started going down across the board and new deals are being made in more modern times. But traditionally, a manager for a band is taking about 20% of whatever a band brings in. Every single dollar that comes in, 20% goes to a manager.
Show me the money!
Again, keep in mind, that could change depending on the band. Now, Dez says that he has a huge management company. That is the quote. I have a huge management company. I personally, right now, we'll look it up in a second, I don't know who all Dez manages. I do know that at least in North America, Dez does manage Ginger. I don't know if this is the band he's talking about. I don't think it would be. So we just looked it up online. The Oracle Management, their artist roster includes Coal Chamber, makes sense because Dez is in Coal Chamber. Cradle of Filth, DevilDriver, again, makes sense because Dez is in DevilDriver. Ginger, Exodus, Wednesday 13, the 69 Eyes. There's a lot on here. Those are the big names that I recognize. Space of Variations, didn't know that. But let's just get back to this talk about management here, because I want to throw a number out here that's going to be kind of crazy. Again, we're talking about a traditional management percentage. I don't know what Dez's deal is with these bands. It could very well be different, so we're not going to make any accusations or anything. But if we're looking at a traditional management deal with a band, he said that this band grossed $235,000 on a tour, right? And that band came home with $12,000 after all of their expenses and everything were paid out. Your management fees, your booking agent fees, your business manager fees, your crew salary, all of your expenses on the road, bus rentals, gear rentals, whatever. After every single little thing was paid for, that band came home with $12,000. If we look at our traditional management fee of 20% of every dollar that a band brings in, you are talking about a manager getting a cut of $47,000 from that one tour. You're talking 4 times more that the manager is making than the actual band. Again, before anybody gets crazy, I don't know the deal with this band and Dez's management company. I'm just using the traditional 20% to show you how these situations can get super fucked up. That's why management deals are changing for a lot of bands in current times, because bands are sick of their managers making way more than they are. And I understand that. I do know of some bands that have in their contracts with their management that they have a clause that says the manager cannot make more than each band member. So even if that 20% was coming out, like say a manager has a 20% deal, it gets capped. So even if they had that 20%, they would get capped at that 12 grand or whatever each band member was making rather. So keep in mind, on top of all of the road expenses that these bands have, they're paying a lot out to managers in a lot of cases too. And I've worked for bands that have been in terrible positions with management. My own band has been in a terrible management agreement. Signing with the wrong manager in the music industry can bury your career. And there are scummy, parasitic managers out there that don't give a shit about who they're working with. They just want to get a young, unsuspecting band that they think that they can make some money off of and then move on to the next one. This industry sucks. As I've said a million times, there are horrible people in it that will take advantage of you if you don't know what's going on. El Nuvian brings up a good question. Can you fire your management at any time, or does it depend on the contract? It 100% depends on the contract. That's why it kind of sucks for bands to sign a specific deal with management. Like, if I were to manage a band, which I have thought about, and I've talked to some bands about it, I would specifically put in my management contract that they could choose to go release me of my duties working for them and go with somebody else at any time. The reason I say that is because I feel like if you're good at what you do, your work should speak for yourself, and you shouldn't have to have a contract to force somebody into working with you. Now, on the flip side of that, I will say there are some managers that the whole reason that they have that in the contract, that a band can't just up and leave, is because some other managers have been burned by bands that, you know, they've worked their ass off for these bands, and then out of nowhere, some bigger manager comes up and says, I want to work with you, and then they bail on that manager. So I get why there is clauses in contracts that bands can't just terminate managers, but at the same time, if I were a manager, I would feel confident enough in myself that I would work my ass off for the band so they wouldn't want to go with somebody else. Let's continue on to the next paragraph. Dez says, quote, we're all facing those things now. I've got a second leg getting ready to be announced with DevilDriver and Cradle of Filth. It's going to be announced for October, and I'm looking at the money, I'm looking at the budgets, and I'm like, wow, this is rough. Even Coal Chamber going out with Mudvayne, I'm looking at everybody's budgets, I'm looking at what everything costs, and it's like insane what it costs. And yeah, we know how much everything costs right now. Like, and I'm glad that people like Dez and bands are talking about it so people understand, because bands themselves aren't as greedy as people would make them out to be. Like when you see that super expensive ticket price, one, the bands have to cover their expenses of what they're bringing on the road, but two, promoters are making a killing off of this situation right now. And I saw later in this article, he does dive into that, so we'll wait till we get there. So Dez wraps this up by saying, quote, so yes, we have to pass it on to the promoter, which is going to pass it on to. The tickets are going to be higher, Dez concurred. And then the fans are going to be pissed, and they're either going to boycott it, or they're going to go, no, I'll pay $50 to see my favorite band. But what they're not going to do is go to 2-3 shows a week anymore. And that same fan that used to go to 2-3 shows, he's going to go to 1 or 2 a month now. So I don't know. It's rough. It's definitely rough. And it's not just rough for the small guys. And we manage some pretty big bands over here. And I look at budgets all day long. That's my forte, man. And I don't see how we can cut. You can't cut it. It's like, well, we need to take a bus. Well, that same bus that was $350 a day. Where the fuck were you getting $350 a day for a bus is what I want to know. Maybe 20 years ago. Like, even in Mark Workman's book about being a tour manager, which was written like 11 years ago, he had his bus budgets at like, I think $550 or something a day. And keep in mind, that's just the rental. But anyways, I'm talking shit. Like, let's see what he said. That same bus that was $350 a day is $750, $800 a day. Absolutely accurate. As I talked about in my How Much Do Tour Buses Cost video, while prepping a tour, the lowest price I saw was $650 a day. And the highest I saw was $1,400 a day. And again, that's just the price to rent the actual bus. That does not include all the other fees, the driver's pay, the fuel. That's just your price for renting a bus. That same driver that was $200 a day is $550, $600 a day. Highest driver pay I've seen on a tour in the last year was about $450. I'm not saying that couldn't happen depending on where he's getting his buses, but that is unreasonably high. The same Uber that took the driver to the fucking hotel room that cost you $23, it's $42. I mean, it's insanity what's happening. I know some of those don't seem like big price increase, like $23, $42, whatever. That shit adds up, man. It's crazy how fast that'll add up. And to Dez's point as well, this isn't just affecting smaller bands. Like we see the end of this article, you know, a reminder that M Shadows from Avenged Sevenfold talked about their upcoming tours, busing prices being $2 million more than it did the last time they toured. Dave Mustaine from Megadeth was talking about how expensive it is just to have a day off on tour. Shinedown canceled its previous fall 2020 dates in Europe because of economic and logistical sides of touring. Anthrax canceled shows in Europe. I mean, we have bands of all sizes that are just financially not making this work right now. Here's the big thing. Bands tour and make music because it's what they love doing. It's their chosen profession. And it would be unfair for us to expect them to do that for free. If they can't make a sustainable living doing this anymore, what the fuck are we going to do? Like, we're going to get to a point where no bands are going to want to tour. But then if they can't tour, they're not going to want to make music. And then you're going to see bands breaking up and stuff. It's a fucking horrible, wild time for the music industry right now. One part of that is because costs are up because of the pandemic and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I don't see those costs ever going down because people are used to it. But also, one more time, for everybody in chat and everybody watching on YouTube later, this is a horrible fucking industry filled with horrible fucking people that are super greedy, that will take every cent that they can from any direction that they can. And right now, bands are getting it the hardest.